Henry Carlyle had always considered himself spectacularly ordinary, a man whose greatest daily victory was convincing himself that reheated leftovers qualified as gourmet cuisine. At 37, he was a semi-retired delivery driver with a receding hairline and a penchant for cracking jokes no one found particularly funny, least of all his cat, Buster, who often stared at him with the existential despair of a creature forced to share its air with someone like Henry. On this particular Tuesday, Henry was indulging in his favourite guilty pleasure, a greasy, ketchup-drenched cheeseburger from Moe's Diner, eaten in the solitude of his ancient pickup truck parked on the edge of Route 17. It wasn't glamorous, but it was his little slice of heaven. He took a big, satisfying bite, savouring the explosion of salt, grease and questionable meat quality, when suddenly the sky erupted with a brilliant green light. "Damn it, Mo, did you put something weird in the ketchup?" Henry muttered, shielding his eyes as the light grew blinding. Before he could contemplate the origins of this unnatural glow, or finish his burger, a fact he would later lament, a loud mechanical hum filled the air. The pickup truck began to shake violently, the fries in his cup holder bouncing like hyperactive popcorn. "What the—" was all Henry managed to say before he was yanked upward, his half-eaten burger tumbling to the floorboard. The sensation was like being sucked into a vacuum, only instead of cleaning up crumbs, it decided to abduct the entire person. 1 second, he was seated in his truck, and the next, he was floating, inside a cavernous, otherworldly chamber. The walls were sleek and metallic, pulsating faintly with a turquoise glow as if the room itself were alive. Henry blinked, then blinked again. "Well," he said, addressing no one in particular, "this is different. Silence, earthling!" The voice that answered was commanding, smooth as polished steel, yet layered with an edge of something deeply unsettling. Henry turned to see its owner, a tall, regal woman standing at the centre of the room, flanked by 2 armed guards, who looked like something out of a science fiction film. The woman's features were otherworldly, her skin a pale silver that shimmered faintly, her eyes a piercing shade of violet, and her dark, flowing hair crowned with an intricate circlet that seemed to hum with power. She was dressed in a flowing garment that defied gravity, the fabric swirling around her like smoke. Henry gawked. "I swear this is the last time I order extra pickles. They've finally done me in." The woman raised a perfectly arched brow, her lips curling into the faintest smirk. "You jest? How quaint." "Quaint is kind of my thing," Henry replied, still floating a few inches off the ground. He flailed his arms, attempting to steady himself. "Also, where's gravity? Big fan of that stuff personally." She gestured lazily, and Henry was unceremoniously dropped to the metallic floor with a loud thud. "Thanks," he groaned, rubbing his backside. "Nice hospitality. You must be the local welcome committee." "I am Queen Xeris of Xenia," the woman declared, her voice echoing through the chamber with the weight of 1,000 unsaid warnings. "Supreme ruler of the Xenan Empire, conqueror of 12 star systems, and arbiter of universal law." Henry squinted up at her, unimpressed. "Cool. I'm Henry, last name Carlyle, conqueror of Moe's lunch menu and arbiter of terrible life decisions." The guards exchanged confused glances, but Xeris seemed intrigued. She stepped closer, her violet eyes narrowing as if to dissect him on a molecular level. "You are insolent," she said, her tone not entirely displeased. "I prefer charmingly irreverent," Henry replied, flashing what he hoped was a winning smile. "Silence," she commanded, though her smirk remained. "You have been selected for servitude, a human subject to assist in matters of state as we pursue a critical mission." "Servitude?" Henry's eyebrows shot up. "Lady, I don't even fold my own laundry." Her eyes flickered dangerously, the smirk vanishing. "You will address me as Your Majesty, and you will learn your place." "Sure, Your Majesty," he said, emphasizing the title with a dramatic bow. Anything for my benevolent alien overlord. The guard stiffened, but Xeris raised a hand, silencing them. For a moment she studied him in silence, her expression unreadable. "You are amusing," she finally said, "a rarity among your kind." "Amusing? That's me," Henry said, dusting himself off. "So what's the gig? Polishing your throne? Organising intergalactic bake sales?" Xeris ignored his sarcasm and turned to the guards. "Prepare the ship for departure. We must reach the Starlit Nebula before the rival factions interfere." "Starlit Nebula? Sounds fancy," Henry quipped. "Do I get a souvenir T-shirt, or is that extra?" "You will follow orders, Earthling," Xeris snapped, though there was a flicker of something behind her words. Perhaps annoyance, perhaps amusement. "And you will speak only when spoken to." Henry raised his hands in mock surrender. "Fine, fine. Your wish is my command, Your Majesty. But, just one question. What happens if I decide to say no to this whole servitude thing?" Xeris leaned in, her gaze icy and unyielding. "Then you will find that my patience is far thinner than the air on your pathetic planet's highest peaks." Henry stared at her for a beat, then shrugged. "Well, when you put it that way." And so began the strangest chapter of Henry Carlisle's life, one that involved alien queens, mysterious artifacts, and a level of sarcasm that could only be described as intergalactic. Henry had always thought adapting to new situations was one of his strong suits, like that time he switched from boxers to briefs without any existential crisis. But adapting to life aboard Queen Z's colossal starship, that was proving to be a whole new level of challenging. For starters, the ship itself felt like something out of a fever dream designed by a very ambitious sci-fi fan. The corridors were impossibly sleek, with walls that shimmered as if coated in liquid starlight. Doors opened and closed with a soft whooshing sound that Henry swore sounded vaguely judgmental. The air carried a faint metallic tang, like the ship had its own atmosphere bottled straight from the future. But the most disorienting part of all was the crew. The Xenon, with their silver-toned skin and glowing violet eyes, moved with an eerie grace that made Henry feel like a bumbling toddler by comparison. Their uniforms, if you could call the flowing, semi-transparent robes uniforms, shifted colours based on their emotions, which Henry found fascinating, but also completely unhelpful when trying to figure out what they were thinking. Still, Henry, being Henry, approached the situation with his usual blend of humour and an uncanny ability to make things awkward. "Excuse me," he called to one of the crew members as he wandered aimlessly down a corridor, trying to find the dining area. "Can you point me to the nearest burger joint? Or failing that, anything vaguely resembling a snack?" The Xenon, a tall, ethereal figure with a robe shifting from pale green to deep blue, paused to stare at him. "The sustenance chambers are not yet calibrated for your biological needs, Earthling," they replied in a melodic but slightly disdainful tone. "Well, that's a shame," Henry said. "I run on a very specific fuel blend, caffeine, saturated fats, and bad decisions." The crew member tilted their head, their robes turning a confused shade of yellow, before walking away without another word. Henry sighed. "Great. Even the aliens are unimpressed with me." Eventually, after what felt like an eternity of wandering, Henry found himself back at the throne room, a cavernous space dominated by a sleek obsidian dais where Queen Xeris sat, her posture as regal as ever. She didn't look up as he entered, her focus fixed on a holographic projection of the Starlit Nebula. "You're late," she said without preamble, her tone cool but not entirely unfriendly. "Late for what? No one gave me a schedule," Henry shot back, shoving his hands into his pockets. "And by the way, I'm starving. Do you guys eat, or are you powered by cosmic vibes and smug superiority?" Xeris finally turned to him, one elegant brow arching. "Your incessant humour is both grating and oddly refreshing." "I aim to please," Henry said with a lopsided grin. "So, what's the plan, Your Majesty? Intergalactic scavenger hunt? Space poker tournament?" Xeris rose from her throne, her robe billowing around her like a living thing. "We are en route to the Starlit Nebula, where an ancient artifact of immense power lies hidden. It is said to hold the key to restoring balance to the Xenan Empire." "Ah, right," Henry said, nodding sagely, because ancient artifacts always work out well. No curses, no unforeseen consequences. Totally a safe bet. Her lips twitched, almost forming a smile. "Your cynicism is noted, Earthling. But this mission is not optional for either of us." "Fantastic," Henry said, clapping his hands together. "So, what's my role in all this? Emotional support? Comic relief?" "You will observe, learn, and obey," Xeris replied sharply, though her tone softened slightly as she added, "and perhaps prove more useful than you appear." Before Henry could respond with another quip, the ship shuddered slightly, the faint hum of its engines shifting pitch. Xeris's expression darkened. "What was that?" Henry asked, his usual bravado giving way to genuine concern. "We are entering contested space," Xeris said, her voice tinged with tension. She turned to one of the holographic consoles and gestured, summoning an image of a sleek, menacing vessel closing in on their position. Henry squinted at the display. Is that bad?" "That feels bad." "It is a ship belonging to the Clax Dominion," Xeris said grimly, "a rival faction that seeks to claim the artifact for themselves." Henry blinked. "So, space pirates?" "More like fanatics with advanced weaponry," Xeris replied. "Great, love that for us," Henry muttered. As the Clax ship drew closer, the atmosphere aboard the Xenan vessel grew increasingly tense. Crew members hurried to their stations, their robes shifting to hues of red and orange as they prepared for what was clearly not going to be a friendly chat. Henry, feeling decidedly out of his depth, tried to stay out of the way, but his curiosity got the better of him. He wandered over to Xeris's side, peering at the holographic display. "So, what's the plan?" he asked. Xeris shot him a sharp look. "The plan is for you to remain silent and let us handle this." "Got it," Henry said, raising his hands. "But if you need someone to, I don't know, distract them with bad jokes, I'm your guy." Xeris didn't dignify that with a response. Instead, she issued a series of rapid commands to her crew, her tone steely and authoritative. The ship's defences came online, shimmering shields enveloping the vessel just as the Clax ship fired its first volley. Henry flinched as the ship rocked violently, but Xeris remained calm, her focus unshakable. "Return fire," she ordered, and the Xenan vessel retaliated with a burst of energy that sent the Clax ship reeling. Henry couldn't help but be impressed. For all her aloofness, Xeris was undeniably formidable. A leader who commanded respect and fear in equal measure. "Okay, I'll admit it," he said, gripping the edge of a nearby console to steady himself. "You're kind of a badass." Xeris glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "And you are an enigma, Henry Carlyle?" "Enigma's a fancy word for idiot, right?" This time, her lips curved into a small, fleeting smile. "Not entirely." The battle ended as abruptly as it began, with the Clax ship retreating into the void. The tension aboard the Xenan vessel eased, though the crew's robes still pulsed with shades of cautious yellow. As the ship resumed its course, Henry couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just crossed some invisible threshold, one where his role in this bizarre adventure might actually matter. And as Xeris returned to her throne, her gaze lingering on him for just a moment longer than necessary, he realized he wasn't the only one feeling it. The starlit nebula stretched before them like a tapestry woven from the cosmos's most brilliant dreams. Rivers of light twisted and coiled in impossible hues, amethyst and sapphire, gold and crimson. each shifting tendril illuminating the dark void in ways that defied human comprehension. Henry stared out of the observation deck's massive viewport, his breath caught somewhere between awe and disbelief. "So, this is normal for you guys?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. A Xenon crew member passing by offered him a sidelong glance, their robe shifting into an amused shade of teal. "For us, it is simply a waypoint. For you, I imagine it is overwhelming." "Overwhelming?" Henry let out a short laugh. "Buddy, I grew up in Jersey. This is practically a religious experience." He was rewarded with what might have been a smirk, though it was hard to tell with the Xenons. They were a little too ethereal for things like clear facial expressions. As he continued to marvel at the nebula, a familiar voice cut through the moment. "You seem unusually quiet, Henry. Have you finally run out of jokes?" He turned to see Queen Xeris approaching, her presence as commanding as ever. Her flowing garment, now a deep iridescent silver, shimmered as she moved. There was a faint smirk on her lips, though her violet eyes held their usual calculating gleam. "Don't worry, Your Majesty," Henry replied, gesturing grandly to the nebula outside. "I'm just saving my best material for when we inevitably get swallowed by a cosmic space whale or something." Xeris arched an elegant brow. "Cosmic space whales are not indigenous to this sector." "Good to know," Henry said with mock seriousness. "That really takes a load off my mind." She let out a soft hum, something between amusement and exasperation, before turning her attention to the nebula. "We are nearing the core. The artifact should be close." Henry blinked. "Wait, we're going into that thing? Like, into there?" "Yes," Xeris said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the universe. "Cool, cool. Love that for us," Henry muttered. "So, what's the plan? Do we knock politely on the door of this ancient artifact? Or is there a secret handshake I should know about?" "There will be no door," Xeris said, casting him a sidelong glance. "The artifact is hidden within a labyrinth of gravitational distortions and spatial anomalies. Reaching it requires precise navigation and an unflinching will." Henry frowned. "You're really selling this as a fun, low-stress outing. You know that?" Before she could reply, a chime sounded throughout the ship, followed by the calm but firm voice of the Xenon navigator. "Your Majesty, we are entering the nebula's core. The gravitational fields are intensifying." "Proceed with caution," Xeris commanded. The ship's engines hummed louder, and the lights inside dimmed slightly as power was redirected to the shields. Henry stumbled as the floor beneath him vibrated, the ship adjusting to the shifting forces outside. "Is it supposed to feel like we're in a blender?" he asked, gripping the edge of a console for support. "This is nothing compared to what lies ahead," Xeris said, her tone calm but edged with focus. "Fantastic," Henry muttered. "Why walk into trouble when you can sprint?" As the ship pushed deeper into the nebula, the view outside became even more surreal. Streams of light twisted and folded in on themselves, creating dazzling spirals and vortexes that seemed to defy physics. Every now and then, a ripple of energy would lash out, colliding with the ship's shields and sending faint tremors through the hull. Despite himself, Henry found his sarcasm waning. The sheer magnitude of what they were doing, the dangers they were facing, was starting to sink in. "You do this kind of thing often?" he asked, his voice quieter now. Xeris glanced at him, and for the first time there was something almost soft in her expression. The pursuit of power, knowledge, and survival often demands such risks. Henry nodded slowly. "Yeah, I guess that tracks. Still, it's a lot." "It is," she admitted, "but hesitation only invites failure." "Well, good thing I'm here to provide an endless supply of bravery, and definitely not anxiety," he said, offering a weak grin. Xeris didn't reply, but there was a faint curve to her lips, almost a smile. The moment didn't last long. "Your Majesty," the navigator's voice cut in again, this time sharper. "We are detecting another vessel on an intercept course." Xerxes' expression hardened instantly. "Identify them." A new hologram appeared, displaying a sleek, angular ship marked with the unmistakable insignia of the Clax Dominion. Henry groaned. "Oh, great. Space fanatics are back. Didn't we just deal with these guys?" "They are persistent," Xerxes said grimly, "and dangerously resourceful." The ship shuddered as the Clax vessel fired a warning shot, the energy blast skimming their shields. "Warning shot?" Henry asked, clutching the console. "That's considerate of them." "Hardly," Xerxes said. "It's a display of dominance, a prelude to attack." "Well, that's just rude," Henry muttered. Xerxes turned to the crew, her voice sharp and commanding. "Evasive maneuvers. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. We cannot afford delays." The ship banked sharply, the inertial dampeners struggling to compensate. Henry stumbled, but managed to stay upright, muttering a string of complaints under his breath. "Let me guess," he said to Xerxes. "This is the part where we narrowly escape by the skin of our teeth, right?" "Your confidence in our survival is noted," she replied dryly. As the Clax vessel closed in, the Xenon ship weaved through the shifting streams of light and energy, using the nebula's chaotic terrain to its advantage. Henry watched in a mix of awe and terror as the view outside became a dizzying blur of motion. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the Clax ship fell back, unable to match the Xenon's expert navigation. "We've lost them," the navigator reported, relief evident even in their melodic tone. Xerxes nodded. "Well done. Resume course." Henry let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "I take it back," he said. "You guys are way better at this whole not dying thing than I gave you credit for." Xerxes glanced at him, her expression softening ever so slightly. "It seems you are beginning to understand the gravity of our mission." "Oh, I understand the gravity," Henry said. "It's the surviving part I'm still getting used to." Her lips curved into that faint, elusive smile again. "You adapt quickly, Henry Carlyle. Perhaps you'll prove more capable than you appear." "Let's not get carried away," he replied, but the warmth in her words lingered. As the ship pressed deeper into the nebula, the artifact drawing ever closer, Henry couldn't help but feel a strange, tentative connection forming between himself and the alien queen. And though he didn't dare admit it, not even to himself, he was starting to care about what happened next. The air aboard the Xenon ship was thick with a kind of tense anticipation, the kind Henry likened to waiting in line for a roller coaster that everyone swore was fun, despite its track being riddled with stomach-turning drops. The crew bustled about with precision, their robes shifting to hues of concentrated green and blue, while Henry, true to form, remained decidedly out of his depth. "You guys always this calm when diving headfirst into the unknown?" Henry asked, leaning against the smooth, glowing wall of the observation deck. "Calmness is a necessity," Xerxes said from her position near the central console, her voice even and steady. "Panic serves no purpose." "Yeah, well, panic's a great cardio workout," Henry muttered, crossing his arms. Xerxes didn't respond, though the faint twitch of her lips suggested she wasn't entirely immune to his attempts at humour. She focused instead on the holographic map hovering before her, a three-dimensional maze of shifting light representing the gravitational anomalies that surrounded the artifact. The artifact. Henry still wasn't sure what to make of it. Sure, it was the driving force behind their perilous journey into the starlit nebula, but the way the crew spoke about it, as if it were some cosmic holy grail, left him skeptical. And Xerxes, for all her cold confidence, there was something about the way her violet eyes lingered on that hologram, something that hinted at stakes far more personal than she let on. "All right, Your Majesty," Henry said, stepping closer to the console. "You've got your fancy map and your fearless crew, But do you actually know what we're looking for? Or are we just hoping the artifact waves a little cosmic flag when we get close? Xeris turned to him, her expression as inscrutable as ever. The artifact is said to radiate a unique energy signature, one that will become unmistakable as we draw nearer. Right, Henry said, nodding slowly, because ancient alien relics are always super cooperative. You doubt the significance of this mission? Xeris observed, tilting her head slightly. No, I get that it's important, Henry said. I'm just saying maybe we don't put all our hopes on a mystical space trinket that no one's seen in, what, a few thousand years? Your cynicism is predictable, Xeris said, though there was no real bite to her words. And yet it is perhaps why you are here. Henry blinked. Wait, what? She turned back to the map, her tone measured. Your perspective is unconventional. It offers balance to the rigid structure of our mission. Wow, Henry said, grinning. Did you just call me useful? I feel like we're having a moment here. Xeris ignored him, but the faintest hint of a smile tugged at the corner of her lips. Before Henry could push his luck further, the ship jolted, a tremor rippling through the hull that sent him stumbling into the console. Okay, he said, clutching the edge for support. What was that? Did we hit a cosmic speed bump? Gravitational turbulence, Xeris said sharply, her focus snapping to the map. We are nearing the innermost layer of the nebula. The hologram shifted, zooming in to reveal a chaotic swirl of energy fields and distortion waves. Henry's stomach sank just looking at it. That looks not great, he said. It is navigable, Xeris replied, though her tone carried a thread of tension. The ship's engines hummed louder, the lights dimming slightly as more power was diverted to the shields. Crew members worked with quiet efficiency, their robes darkening to shades of concentrated indigo as they adjusted the ship's trajectory. Henry, feeling increasingly useless, wandered to the viewport. The sight outside was mesmerizing, streams of light twisting and spiraling around them, creating patterns that seemed both random and deliberate. It was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache, like staring at something far too vast for human comprehension. You ever stop and just look at this? He asked, not turning away from the view. Xeris joined him, her presence somehow both grounding and intimidating. The beauty of the cosmos is undeniable, she said, but it is often a mask for its dangers. Spoken like someone who's seen some things, Henry said. She didn't reply, but the weight of her silence spoke volumes. The moment was broken by an alert chime, and the navigator's voice rang out. Your Majesty, we've detected the artifact's energy signature. It is within range. Henry turned back to the hologram, which now displayed a pulsing point of light at the center of the chaotic maze. Well, there it is, he said. Mystical space trinket, dead ahead. Prepare the retrieval team, Xeris commanded, her voice steely as the crew sprang into action. Henry hesitated. He knew better than to volunteer for anything remotely dangerous, but curiosity, and maybe a flicker of something else, got the better of him. So, what's the plan here? He asked. Xeris glanced at him, her expression unreadable. You will remain aboard the ship. Wait, what? Henry said, straightening. You're just going to leave me here? What if something happens? You're not trained for this, she said simply. Yeah, no kidding, Henry said, but I've made it this far, haven't I? Xeris studied him for a moment as if weighing his worth. Finally, she sighed. Very well, but stay close and do not interfere. Scout's honor, Henry said, grinning. I find it hard to believe you were ever a scout, she replied, though her tone was almost amused. The retrieval team was small, but efficient, their movements precise as they prepared to disembark in a smaller vessel designed for navigating the nebula's most treacherous regions. Henry fidgeted nervously as he joined them, his usual bravado feeling paper-thin in the face of what lay ahead. As they descended into the heart of the nebula, the energy fields grew denser, the ship's shields crackling with each impact. Henry's heart raced, his grip on his seat tightening with every jolt. "This is fine," he muttered under his breath. "Totally fine. Just a quick trip to pick up a cursed artifact. What could go wrong?" Xerus, seated beside him, glanced his way. "Are you always this vocal, when nervous?" "Only when I'm about to die," Henry shot back. She smirked, a small but genuine expression that caught him off guard. "You're not going to die, Henry." "Glad one of us is confident," he muttered. The smaller vessel finally reached the artifact's location, a massive, glowing structure that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. It was breathtaking and ominous all at once, and Henry couldn't shake the feeling that they were waking something that had been asleep for far too long. "All right," he said, taking a deep breath. "Let's get this over with." Xerus led the way, her every step exuding confidence, while Henry followed, trying to ignore the gnawing sense that they were crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The moment Henry set foot inside the chamber of the artifact, he felt the air shift. It wasn't the temperature or the pressure. It was something deeper, more primal, like the universe itself had stopped breathing to watch what would happen next. The walls of the chamber shimmered with a faint, otherworldly light, patterns swirling like living constellations. The artifact itself hovered at the center, suspended in a column of twisting energy that pulsed in sync with an invisible rhythm. Henry glanced at Xerus, who stood a few paces ahead, her posture as regal and composed as ever. Her eyes, however, betrayed something more, a flicker of unease, as though even she couldn't fully anticipate what they were dealing with. "So, Henry began, his voice echoing faintly in the cavernous space. "Is it supposed to look like the universe's most intense lava lamp, or is that just a bonus feature?" Xerus didn't turn to him, her gaze fixed on the artifact. "The patterns are a manifestation of its power," she said, her voice low. "They reflect the energy it draws from the fabric of reality itself." "Great," Henry said, stuffing his hands into his jacket pockets, "because what I needed in my life was a reality-warping space object." Xerus shot him a sharp look, but there was a faint twitch of amusement at the corner of her mouth. "Your commentary remains as helpful as ever." "Hey, I'm just saying what we're all thinking," Henry replied, gesturing to the retrieval team, who were cautiously setting up their equipment around the artifact. "You guys are thinking it, right? This thing is screaming bad idea to all of you too." The Xenan closest to him turned, their iridescent robes flickering with a faint pink hue that Henry could only assume was mild annoyance. "Please refrain from distracting us," they said, their voice melodic but firm. Henry raised his hands in mock surrender. All right, I'll keep my existential dread to myself." Xerus ignored him, stepping closer to the artifact. The swirling energy around it seemed to react to her presence, the patterns growing more complex, more vivid. She extended a hand, her movements slow and deliberate, and the energy rippled outward, filling the chamber with a low, resonant hum. "Is it supposed to be doing that?" Henry asked, inching closer, despite his better judgment. "It's responding," Xerus said, her tone laced with awe. "The artifact recognizes us." "Recognizes us?" Henry echoed. "Like in a friendly way, or a get-off-my-lawn kind of way?" Before Xerus could answer, the artifact pulsed brightly, and the hum intensified, vibrating through the floor and into Henry's bones. He staggered, grabbing onto a nearby console for support, while the retrieval team scrambled to recalibrate their equipment. "Your Majesty," one of them called out, their voice tinged with alarm. "The energy levels are spiking." Xerus didn't flinch, her gaze locked on the artifact. "Stabilize the field. We're close." Henry, meanwhile, was beginning to regret every life choice that had led him to this moment. "Stabilize the field," he muttered, mimicking Xerus's calm tone. "Sure, because that sounds totally doable when the laws of physics are having a nervous breakdown." He flinched as another pulse of energy surged through the chamber, this one accompanied by a sharp crackle of electricity. The retrieval team shouted in unison, their robes flashing through a spectrum of colours as they worked frantically to regain control. "Zeus," Henry said, his voice rising with urgency. "I don't want to be that guy, but maybe we should, not mess with the glowing death orb." Her eyes flicked to him, sharp and unyielding. "Fear clouds your judgment, Henry. If we retreat now, everything we've risked will be for nothing." "Right, and if we don't retreat, we might not be around to regret it," Henry shot back. Before she could respond, the artifact flared again, this time emitting a wave of energy that sent everyone reeling. Henry hit the floor with a grunt, the wind knocked out of him. When he looked up, the patterns on the walls had shifted. They were no longer random, they were coherent symbols. "Ah, guys," Henry said, pushing himself to his feet, "am I the only one seeing ancient alien graffiti, or—" His words were cut off as a voice filled the chamber, deep and resonant, yet eerily calm. It wasn't speaking any language Henry recognized, but the meaning somehow slid into his mind, as though it had always been there. "Who dares disturb the balance?" Henry's mouth went dry. "Okay, that's new." Zia stepped forward, her posture unshaken despite the voice's intimidating presence. "We come seeking the knowledge you guard," she said, her voice steady and authoritative. There was a pause, and the air seemed to thicken, pressing down on them like an invisible weight. Then the voice spoke again, this time tinged with something almost like curiosity. "Knowledge comes at a price. Do you accept this burden?" Zaius didn't hesitate. "We do." Whoa, hold on," Henry interjected, stepping forward. "Can we get a little more info on this price thing before we sign on the dotted line? Transparency and all that." The chamber fell silent, and for a moment Henry thought he'd made a terrible mistake. But then the voice returned, and this time it felt like it was directed solely at him. "You question where others obey. Why?" Henry blinked, caught off guard. Because blind obedience usually gets people killed. Call me crazy, but I like knowing what I'm getting into." The voice rumbled, a sound that could have been a laugh or a warning. "You are an anomaly, human, a fragile creature with the audacity to challenge the unknown." "Yeah, well, I've been called worse," Henry said, trying to ignore the way his knees were shaking. Zia shot him a warning glance but said nothing, her attention snapping back to the artifact as the energy around it shifted once more. "Very well," the voice said. "The knowledge you seek will be granted, but only if you prove worthy." The energy around the artifact flared, and the chamber seemed to dissolve, the walls and floor replaced by a swirling void of light and shadow. Henry's stomach lurched as gravity itself seemed to twist, leaving him weightless and disoriented. "Zeiss," he called out, his voice echoing strangely. "What the hell is happening?" "We've entered the artifact's trial," she replied, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. "Trial?" Henry repeated, his voice rising. "What kind of trial?" "One that will test our resolve," Zaius said, her gaze fixed on the swirling void, "and our worth." "Great," Henry muttered, gripping the edge of his jacket like it was a lifeline. Because nothing says fun adventure like being judged by a glowing space relic. Zeus didn't respond, but the faint tension in her jaw told him she wasn't as composed as she seemed. As the void began to solidify into a new, surreal landscape, one filled with shifting terrain and impossible geometry, Henry took a deep breath and muttered under his breath, "I really should have stayed in Jersey." The trial began with a sudden, disorienting shift in the very fabric of reality. Henry stumbled, his feet sinking into a surface that wasn't quite solid, yet wasn't liquid either. A shimmering plane of shifting colours that made his head spin if he looked too closely. The air felt dense and charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm, and the sky above them was an endless expanse of swirling galaxies. Well, Henry said, steadying himself as best he could, this is unsettling. Zia stood a few feet ahead, her posture unyielding as always, though even she seemed momentarily taken aback by their surroundings. The terrain around them shifted and reformed with every step, as if it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Mountains melted into valleys, rivers split into veins of liquid light, and the ground beneath their feet pulsed like a living thing. "This is the trial," Zia said, her voice steady but low, as if speaking too loudly might anger the strange world around them. "Yeah, I figured that part out," Henry muttered, glancing nervously at a nearby tree-like structure that seemed to grow, twist, and dissolve all at once. "So, what's the plan here? Do we just walk around until the artifact decides we've passed?" "The trial is not so simple," Zeus replied, her gaze scanning the horizon. "It will test us, our will, our courage, our understanding of ourselves. Only those deemed worthy will be granted passage." "Great," Henry said, throwing up his hands. "So we're playing cosmic therapy roulette, just what I needed." Zia shot him a sharp look, but her usual stoicism seemed to falter for a moment. She hesitated, then turned to face him fully, her expression uncharacteristically serious. "Henry," she said, her tone softer than he'd ever heard it, "I must warn you. The artifact's trials are said to target one's deepest fears and regrets. It will not be easy." Henry blinked, caught off guard by her candour. "Yeah, well," he said, forcing a smile, "life hasn't exactly been a cakewalk so far. What's one more existential crisis?" Zysis regarded him for a moment longer, her violet eyes searching his face as if looking for something. Then she nodded, a faint but genuine gesture of acknowledgement. Before either of them could say more, the ground beneath their feet began to ripple, the colours bleeding together like ink in water. Henry stumbled again, cursing under his breath as the world around them twisted and shifted. When the chaos settled, they were no longer alone. Figures emerged from the shifting landscape, their forms flickering like static on an old TV. They were human-shaped, but not human, each one a distorted reflection of something familiar yet wrong. Henry's breath caught as one of the figures stepped closer, its face resolving into an eerie, almost perfect likeness of someone he hadn't seen in years. "Dad," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The figure didn't respond, but its eyes, identical to Henry's own, pierced through him, filled with an accusatory glare. "Henry," the figure said, its voice a distorted echo of his father's, "always running, always joking. When will you take responsibility for the messes you leave behind?" Henry's stomach churned, and he took a step back, shaking his head. Nope, not doing this," he said, his voice louder now. "You're not real. This is just the artifact messing with me." The figure tilted its head, a cold, knowing smile spreading across its face. "Is that what you tell yourself? That none of it matters because it's not real?" "Henry!" Zaius's voice cut through the growing haze of dread. She was standing a few feet away, surrounded by her own phantoms. Ethereal, Zen-like figures whose flowing robes flickered with strange, shifting colours. But her gaze was locked on him, her tone sharp and commanding. "It is an illusion. Do not let it control you." Henry clenched his fists, forcing himself to focus on her voice, her presence. The figure before him began to blur, its features melting back into the chaos of the landscape. "Okay," he said, exhaling shakily. "That was unpleasant." "The trial is designed to exploit your weaknesses," Zeus said, stepping closer to him. Her voice had regained its usual steadiness, though her expression was tight. "It will not stop until we prove we can overcome them." Henry glanced at her, noting the faint tension in her jaw, the way her hands were clenched at her sides. "You've got your own ghosts, huh?" She didn't answer, but the flicker of pain in her eyes was all the confirmation he needed. They pressed on, the shifting landscape throwing new challenges at them with every step. The illusions became more vivid, more personal. Memories twisted and warped into cruel mockeries. Henry saw faces he tried to forget, heard voices dredged up from the deepest recesses of his mind. But through it all, Zeus remained a steady presence, her determination unwavering. She guided him with sharp commands and the occasional reassuring glance, her own struggles kept tightly guarded. At one point they reached a bridge made of light, stretching across a chasm that seemed to have no bottom. The air around it buzzed with energy, and Henry could feel the hairs on his arms standing on end. "Let me guess," he said, eyeing the bridge warily. "If we fall, we're stuck in eternal freefall or something equally horrifying." Zeus arched a brow at him. "Do you always deflect with humour?" "Only when I'm terrified," Henry admitted, stepping onto the bridge despite his pounding heart. The structure held, but the air around them grew heavier with every step. Halfway across, the bridge began to flicker, and Henry froze. Zeus," he said, glancing back at her, "little help here?" She didn't hesitate, moving to his side with a calmness that belied the danger. "Keep moving," she said firmly. "The bridge reacts to hesitation. Trust yourself." "Trust myself," Henry repeated, his voice tinged with sarcasm. "Great advice, considering I don't have a great track record with self-preservation." But he forced himself to move, one cautious step at a time, and Zeus stayed close, her presence steadying him. When they finally reached the other side, Henry let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Remind me to never take up tightrope walking," he said, leaning against a nearby rock-like formation. Zeus gave him a faint smile, a rare expression that softened her otherwise imperious demeanour. "You are stronger than you realize, Henry." He looked at her, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. "Coming from you, that almost sounds like a compliment." "Perhaps it is," she said, her gaze flickering back to the shifting landscape ahead. The trial wasn't over, but in that moment Henry felt a flicker of hope, a sense that together they might just make it through. The artifact chamber was still once more, its light reduced to a soft, steady glow. The surreal and shifting landscapes of the trial had vanished, leaving Henry and Zeus standing on solid ground. Their faces were marked with exhaustion, both physical and emotional, but their postures reflected the quiet resolve of people who had faced the depths of themselves and emerged on the other side. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence in the chamber was different now, not the ominous quiet that had greeted them upon arrival, but a calm. It was an almost reverent stillness. It felt like the artifact itself was watching, waiting. "Well," Henry finally said, breaking the silence, "that was a lot." Zeus turned to him, her gaze steady but softened in a way he wasn't used to. "Indeed." "Any chance we can just agree to never talk about the whole trial of inner demons thing again?" Henry asked, managing a weak grin. "Because I really don't want to relive any of that." A flicker of amusement crossed Zeus's face, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Your ability to trivialize the most harrowing experiences is remarkable." "Hey, it's a gift," Henry said, shrugging. "Keeps me from completely losing it." Her expression grew more serious as she stepped closer to the artifact, its surface now calm and unassuming, as if all the chaos it had unleashed was nothing more than a bad dream. She placed a hand on the shimmering surface, and the chamber was filled with a gentle hum, the artifact responding to her touch. "What now?" Henry asked, crossing his arms. "Does it, hand over the secrets of the universe or something?" Zeus didn't answer immediately. Instead, she closed her eyes, her expression one of quiet focus. The artifact pulsed softly, and a stream of light flowed from it, wrapping around her like a cocoon of energy. For a moment, Henry panicked, thinking it was attacking her, but the serene look on her face stopped him from intervening. When the light faded, Zeus opened her eyes, her gaze distant as though she were looking at something far beyond the chamber. "It has given me the knowledge we sought," she said finally, her voice low but steady. "The key to the balance of our worlds, right?" Henry said, nodding slowly. "And what does that mean exactly? Because I'm still playing catch-up here." She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "It means that the artifact has fulfilled its purpose. It has chosen to entrust its power to me and to us." "Us?" Henry raised an eyebrow. "What do I have to do with any of this? I'm just the guy who accidentally ended up in the middle of your intergalactic drama." Zeus tilted her head, her gaze softening. "You are far more than that, Henry. The artifact would not have allowed you to survive its trial if it did not see your worth." Henry blinked, momentarily caught off guard. Thanks, I guess, but I'm still not sure what I'm supposed to do with that information." "You already have," Zeus said simply. "Your presence here, your actions, your words. They have shaped this journey as much as my own." Henry scratched the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable with the weight of her words. "Yeah, well, I didn't do it for cosmic recognition or whatever. I mostly did it because—" He hesitated, then sighed. "Because I care. About you. About all of this." Zeus's expression softened further, the stoic mask she usually wore giving way to something warmer, more vulnerable. "Henry, I did not expect to feel the way I do about you. Your defiance, your humour, your compassion, they are traits I once dismissed as weaknesses, but now I see their strength." He stared at her, his usual quips failing him for once. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" She stepped closer, and for a moment the walls of the chamber seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them in a universe of their own. "I am saying that this journey has changed me. You have changed me." Henry swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. "Well, that's unexpected, but not unwelcome." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "You are a peculiar man, Henry." "Peculiar good or peculiar bad?" he asked, his voice light despite the intensity of the moment. "Peculiar, irreplaceable," she said, and for the first time he saw a hint of vulnerability in her eyes. Before either of them could say more, the chamber began to shift. The artifact's light grew brighter, and a deep, resonant voice echoed through the space. A voice neither male nor female, neither kind nor cruel, but something vast and unknowable. "The balance has been restored," the voice said. "The journey is complete." Henry and Zeus exchanged a glance as the light enveloped them, and the next thing Henry knew, they were standing outside the artifact chamber back on the ship. The retrieval team was already there, looking confused but unharmed. "What just happened?" Henry asked, still trying to process the sudden shift. "The artifact has released us," Zeus said, her tone thoughtful. "Its purpose was to guide, not to control." "And now what?" Henry asked, looking at her. "We just go back to normal?" "Normal will never be the same," Zeus said, a faint smile playing on her lips. "But we will find a new balance, together." Henry stared at her for a moment, then nodded. "You know, for someone who started this whole thing by taking me as her prisoner, you're not half bad." "And for someone who began as an insubordinate nuisance," she said, her voice tinged with rare humour, "you are acceptable." He grinned. "I'll take it." As the ship prepared to leave the planet, Henry stood beside Zeus, the two of them gazing out at the vast expanse of stars. For the first time in his life, Henry didn't feel out of place. He didn't feel like he was running from something or fumbling his way through life. Instead, he felt like he belonged, like he had found his place in the universe. And as Zeus stood silently beside him, her presence steady and grounding, he realized that the journey they had just completed was only the beginning. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. And for Henry, that was enough.